Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this live discussion of 13th. We're going to let the participant numbers grow up, and then we'll start the Q&A. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be starting here shortly. Great. We have a good amount of people in here, so we can get this started. Thank you so much for joining.
Good evening to we the people required watching. This is a series of conversations that are to stimulated by a selection of films that we did. I want to thank you for joining us. There's a Q&A button on your screen if you want to type in text questions that you want us to do some answers for, so please do that. You can just do that starting right now. I'll try to get to them as fast as we possibly can during this conversation. The Film Society, this is brought to you by the Film Society. The Film Society is a nonprofit dedicated to independent international cinema. I want to thank the Film Society for doing this. I also want to thank our members for their support for these kind of programs. If you become a member and interested in becoming a member, please go to mspfilm.org. If you're interested just in supporting, you can also go to mspfilm.org for more information about the organization. This film here that you saw, the 13th, was made possible thank you to Penny and Bill George Foundation, Kelly and Mike Palmer, and Knock for their support in this screening effort. So thank you for that. Tonight we have I think, some really influential people that I have known and have talked to over the years, and I'm really happy to have them there, and we're going to welcome them in a minute. I want to, Don Lewis, who's an attorney here. He's co-founder of Nealhan and Johnson and Lewis firm. His practice focuses on employment litigation and white-collar crime defense. We have Ken Rance, who's a graduate of Howard in film. He's worked for William Morris, also does consulting and nonprofits. Clayton Tyler, who's also an attorney for federal and state law and a criminal defense attorney. So we have a really good guest. I'm glad you guys are here. Thank you for coming. The film, The 13th, is really, it's one of the things that came to me about watching this film really was the fact that media played such an important part to determining kind of where we are as African Americans, as Black people in this world today, and how racism has sort of been influenced by this effort. If you look at the historical images of race from the Birth of a Nation to the stills about lynching taken by white people for white people, Emmett Till's photograph, which I personally remember as a child seeing those. It was interesting that our parents made us see those pictures. I mean, I was like 4 or 5 years old, but they wanted us to know what it was like out there in the world. Rodney King, the original cell phone videos, and obviously to this point in time where we are with George Floyd. I want to talk to you guys and see, we get your take on this. I mean, 13th sort of outlines this. I mean, it is slavery, but it deals with that, but it's what eliminated slavery, but they created a new form of oppression that came out of that. So let's talk about that a little bit if we could. Any thoughts?
This is Clayton Tyler. Like you said, it created absolutely a new form of slavery. People that go into prison, they have just a host of things that happen. They come out of prison. First of all, when they go in, they're subject to paying for everything that they get in there. Their food, their paper, their envelopes, their phone calls. They work for free. It's just a terrible institution. And then when they get out, even worse, because when they come out of prison, they don't have, half of them don't have their GED by the time they get out. Once they get out, they can't get a job. They can't get health insurance. They can't get housing. And it just perpetuates itself. And so it's just a quick fix to go back into prison because they have to make a living to try to support their family. And so it's just a new form of slavery, and it's been going on for a while. And it's just sort of a sad situation.
This criminalization aspect of Black people, I mean, because we're no longer slaves, but we are now criminals. which is in essence kind of where the film sort of designs us. And they had to criminalize the black male in the essence. And so the media was part of this. And so to your point, is like they needed to control the black population, the black male populations more specifically, by doing this and giving you a title. What, you have any thoughts about this, Don?
Well, the media has always played a major role in how we view each other, how we view our own place in society, and to the point that you raised a couple minutes ago, images and media have played very significant roles in terms of the shifting, either for the positive or negative, in terms of change. So when you think of Birth of a Nation and Willie Horton, those are images, media images that turn things to the worse. With the advent of television, even well-meaning people portrayed black folks in certain ways and manners. On the other hand, you have an image of Emmett Till and the most recent image of George Floyd that have the capacity of turning attitudes toward the good. So you're absolutely correct. Media coverage and visual images are very, very potent in this society.
One of the things that I think it was Du Bois who said that, one day we were free from slavery, but we only spent a moment in the sunshine, and then we were pushed back, which I think is very interesting, that I think that's what has happened to us, is that we've been pushed back into a different kind of slavery. And I think this is what people, specifically white people, have not figured out, is that, this is not something we asked for. This is not something, we actually ever enjoyed at any level of freedom for maybe a few months there after, emancipation, but it was never something that so we really have been always captured by the system. And so, I think that one of the things that I think is essential to that is the fact that because slavery was a capitalist system and racism is an economic system, it was created for an economic system. And so thus those two end up going kind of hand in hand. So what are you thinking about this, Ken?
I think that we need to admit that the black man has never had a day of rest since captivity and being brought to this country to build it up and to make it the great nation that it is. And when you talk about criminal, the institution and the system of slavery itself, what greater crime or atrocity has taken place in our nation? And if we take it back to 1619, I just think it's ironic how the founding fathers, who were running criminal enterprises by kidnapping and raping and holding people captive for this free labor to help build the land, to grow the crops, for the United States to become this economic engine, then even with the passage of the 13th Amendment, we were never free. It then took the 14th Amendment for us to have equal protection under the law. And then it took the 15th Amendment for us to even have a semblance of being able to vote. And so I think what the 13th documentary does is it shows that the concept, the system, the institution of slavery has metamorphosized and changed over the course of time. But Black people are not free. And I think that, unfortunately, in having to watch the live murder of George Floyd actually kind of stirred up and has awoken a certain level of truth in regards to our existence here and the continual oppression and terror and trauma that we have gone through since day one.
I think that we have to your point, is that the level of fear that Black people have and have had our whole life is there. And people wonder why we all have high blood pressure, because we're scared half the time. I mean, I think that we may not look like we're scared, but we know that situation. It's that whole thing of when you get pulled over, and we all have been pulled over by police officers at some point in time in our lives, more than a few times. You know, that's
and you know what it is, Greg? It's the boop, boop.
Yeah, right, exactly. Behind you.
You hear that boop, boop?
Yeah. You know, and we've all had the talk. We all had the talk. We had the talk, and we gave the talk. And the talk is, basically what to do to save your life. And you're told this when you're a child. There's a
but even with the talk, I started writing an essay, because I have two children. My daughter's 14, my son's 11. And I started writing an essay entitled "The Talk is Dead." And the reason why is because there are no rules to this now. Because now our just sheer existence is a threat. It's a crime. We can't watch birds. We can't jog. We can't walk into our own homes. We can't be in our own homes after a hard day's work without being shot and killed. We can't be in our home where an officer comes in and shoot you because she thought that she was in her own apartment, And so in this essay, talking about the talk is dead, I'm trying to talk to my children about how to encounter the police and what to do. There are no longer rules for that. Philando Castile did what he did. He tried to explain that he was a concealed carry permit owner, murdered. I mean, where do we now, win? What are the rules to that? And so now it's just, it is crazy.
And every day I see, as a criminal law attorney, these minor traffic stops that intersect into our lives for a tail light, or failing to do a turn signal, or driving over the line a little bit. And what happens is they stop you, and then they interact in your life. And in the Floyd case, look at this is a petty crime. Or some of the other cases, they have these minor crimes, and you lose your life over something that's such a minor crime. It doesn't make any sense. And there's just, it's sad that the police officers, if it wasn't for video in these instances, they probably would have gotten off, because I see it every single day in the cases that I handle, where the police officers are not telling the truth about something that happened. That happens all the time. And who are you going to believe? You're going to believe the Black person who's out on the street, allegedly doing something wrong, or you're going to believe the white officer. And then it's even worse when you get to the jury trial. And I do a lot of jury trials, because what happens is, and Don can probably speak to this too, you very rarely have a Black juror on your jury. I mean, that's very rare. In 40 years, I probably have had maybe 10 on all of the different juries that I've tried in 40 years. It's ridiculous. And so they're intersecting in our lives all the time. And there's not much that we can do about it at this point in time. So the Floyd case is an important case, because it's changing people's opinions as to what can happen and what can't happen.
But Clay, let me ask you this. So I just heard that the trial starts in March. Hennepin County may move elsewhere. It's a jury trial. We saw with Rodney King, video. We saw with Tamir Rice, video. We saw with Philando Castile, there's video. Ahmaud Arbery, video. Brother that was shot in Ohio in the Walmart with the BB gun, right? You shot video. What if these 4 officers go to trial and they're acquitted?
Okay, well, I'm going to be very clear about this. There are some very good defense attorneys that are handling these cases, and they are going to bring up a bunch of stuff. They're going to say, well, maybe he died from the fentanyl that was in his system. Maybe the cop that was just watching it says, well, I wasn't part of the assault. Or one of the cops that was sitting on him, he's going to say, well, I told him to turn him over. All these different things are going to come up during the trial. And so, what the defense attorney has to do is he has to create doubt as to whether or not his client committed the assault or participated in it. And so it is not a slam dunk. It's a very difficult case, but
that's what I find. That's what I find so interesting about it. It's a very difficult case. Yet and still, we watched a murder take place.
Without question.
When is the last murder we saw in Robbinsdale, New Hope, Crystal, Edina, Egan, Woodbury? You know what I'm saying? And so I think it leads to a larger systemic issue where our lives are not valued.
Well, there are some lives, though. There's some lives that are valued, and those are the lives of police officers. And one of the systemic issues in these police cases is the way that the legal standard is structured.
Yep.
And the problem in these cases is that the legal standard gives deference to police decision-making. And the jurors get read legal instructions. They're told to follow them. And they're told that you're supposed to view the facts from the lens of the reasonable police officer acting under the circumstances that are faced the police officer without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. And so one of the factors is very structural in the law. But the other factor too is just the bias that's built into the jurors who come to the panel predisposed to value the word of, and this Clayton was hitting on, value the word of a police officer over of a civilian, and particularly a Black civilian. So at every stage of this process, there's deference given to the police officer, and that has to change. And one of the biggest problems, and I want to mention this in light of a comment that Clayton made, is that the problem is that what bothers me so much about these cases is that the police officers in making these split-second decisions lose all sight of context about why. I wish somebody in the middle, 4 minutes into the knee into George Floyd's neck, one of the officers would have said something like, hey, why did we come here in the first place?
Yeah.
So that they would be reminded that they came there because of a report of a counterfeit $20 bill.
Yeah, or how about better this?
Gardner, why did we come here in the first? Oh, it was because you were selling cigarettes. Yeah. I mean, that people lose all perspective of why they were there to begin with.
Yeah, or how about, hey, we're killing this person.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't kill this person.
But that's a police issue. I mean, as you're talking about, right?
That's a lack of humanity issue. And I think that we have systems that are designed to support those kinds of behaviors with immunity. And I think if you go back and look at the concept of whiteness and laws here in this country, start back in Virginia after Bacon's Rebellion, Black people couldn't take white people to court. Dred Scott taught us that Black people aren't citizens of this country, even though we were born here under captivity. So historically, we have a judicial system that has never given us equal protection or rights under the law for us as people.
I'm going to jump in here real quick about the juror situation. I mean, I was on a murder case, and a jury on a murder case where one African American killed another African American, and I was the only one. You know, is there? And I mean, I did it. You know, I mean, I got the call. I go down and do that. Is there a reason that Blacks are not required, or is it just the availability of the amount of Black people in Minnesota? What is the issue there?
Well, I mean, technically speaking, they go through the voter rolls and they pull up the list of jurors from the voting rolls. And you got to be, for the life of me, if you're pulling up the voting rolls, Black people vote, so why shouldn't they be down there? I got to say that in all due respect, that it's gotten a lot better than it was when I first started practicing. But it was dismal when I first started practicing. And I still haven't, and I try a lot of cases. I just haven't seen very many Black people on the juries. So it's sort of sad.
I wonder if that's another collateral consequence. I'm curious, you know, that question was asked of me yesterday by Geraldine Steele. I was talking with her on the phone, and she asked me kind of that same issue. And I'm wondering if again, you know, one collateral consequence is the loss of your right to vote. I wonder if that impacts the voter rolls as well. And that's one reason why we're still seeing a few jurors. I mean, Hennepin County is a big county, so you're going to have majority white jury panels regardless, because they're pulling in a lot of people in from the suburbs. And the other factor is that even, you know, when you do get a person of color in the panel, they may have compelling circumstances why they can't serve, given jobs or whatever other family care that might end up getting them off the panel. But it's a problem. It's still a big problem.
What is there that we can do to change that, or is there any way to change that system?
Well, the prosecutors even try to get rid of some of the Black jurors that are on the panel too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the reality, and they have challenges for that they have to go to the judge to determine whether or not it's a proper challenge or not. So even when you do get some Black jurors, the prosecutors are trying to get rid of them. So.
Yeah. Is it true that most of the prosecutors in the Twin Cities, or Minneapolis, I should say, are white? Is it something that Black people don't go into? It seems to be the issue.
I wouldn't say that most of them are white. I mean, okay. I know a number of Black prosecutors in town, and you know, prosecutors have a lot of discretion, and so, but I wouldn't say that the majority of them are white, just as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would think a part of it would be the cost of, you know, acquiring a legal education. I mean, when you take a look at the numbers of enrollment for African Americans and Latinx for law schools, I mean, it's very low. And then in having to pay back those loans and then be a public servant, I mean, you know, many of my classmates that are attorneys have had to go and work for large corporations to pay back those loans, where they may have wanted to work in public service to be able to, you know, serve the people. And I think sometimes maybe being a prosecutor is viewed as being the enemy, because you are, you know, locking up people of color. Whereas,
well, you know, I want to, as a former prosecutor, let me speak up. I would encourage any law student who's thinking about public sector law to become a prosecutor.
Absolutely.
Because as Clayton will tell you, those are the folks who make the decisions. And I want to use, so you want to be able, you're going to have more influence as a prosecutor in framing the charges. And so that I make that point. This prosecutorial discretion is very critical in this whole process. But I wanted to kind of use that as a segue to kind of an issue that I'm not quite sure is emphasized enough in the film, and that is that the criminal justice system involves discretionary decision making at every stage that tends to work against Black individuals, particularly Black men. And let me give you the example. Let's start at the very beginning of the criminal justice process, and that is the decision of a police officer to decide where he or she is going to enforce the law. And one of the biggest issues with respect to crack cocaine or powder cocaine is the officer or the police department needs to decide, what are we going to do today? Are we going to try to flush people, rich white kids out of the basement in Edina, trying to see if we can arrest them for having a half an ounce of powder or 3 grams of powder cocaine? Or would it be easier for us to go along West Broadway in North Minneapolis and see who we can find who has crack cocaine? They're going to decide for the latter, because that may be lower hanging fruit, so to speak, and they may be able to arrest more people and they may be able to get them punished faster. And that's an example of what happens at the very beginning that brings Black men into the system, or has brought Black men into the system. And then you go through every decision-making stage at the arrest, and whether or not they're released on bail, and whether or not they hire their own attorney or get a public defender, and all the way through the process where these discretion, and then the plea bargaining with the prosecutor, who gets the plea deals, who doesn't. All those discretionary decisions operate to the disadvantage, are tainted by bias and result in decision-making to the disadvantage of Black men.
I gotta just throw a shout out right now, because Judge Pamela Alexander, my former law partner at the Legal Rights Center, was the first judge in the nation that said that crack cocaine and powder cocaine are the same. And I think it cost her a federal judgeship. And so I just want to throw a shout out to her right now.
And her view was ultimately vindicated when starting with the federal sentencing commission, when they started altering the sentencing guidelines to eliminate that difference.
Well, John, I think you're right. I mean, when I lived in Charlotte, I was on the police conduct review panel for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. And in going through that process and doing ride-alongs with officers, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of discretion that they have. They could decide to do a traffic stop for a vehicle that has expired tabs. Maybe they then decide to give the guy a warning because he's on his way to work.
Right.
As opposed to have him step out the vehicle, towing the vehicle. Now it gets impounded. He's got to pay those court fees. Then he loses, a gig, what have you. Then when I worked with the city of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County courts in their dispute resolution program and mediated cases to keep them from going to court, you get to sit through a court and you see that, the white guys that are able to afford legal counsel for the same offenses, seem to have a better outcome than the brothers that weren't able to make bail, don't have their own independent legal representation and not having to work with a public defender. I mean, and you just begin to see how those odds are continually, stacked against them. And, when I live in Los Angeles and I work with juvenile offenders with the LA County Department of Probation, man, with those juveniles, once they catch a case and they get in the system, the longer they're in there, the harder it becomes for them to be able to break free from that cycle. And it's almost a pathway to the penitentiary, unfortunately.
I just got a call today from a guy out in California saying that he is a nonviolent offender, but he got caught up with a weapon and the 3-strike law. He's been in jail for 19 years now, and he was wondering if there's anything I could do about it. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. I want to change the subject just a little bit, because I read this article in the New Yorker, and it was very, very disturbing to me, because one of the things that is going on right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the governor of the state, according to the article, says that we're not going to count prisoners who have COVID because it would increase the statistics of the state. And so what they're saying right there is that these people aren't even human at all. We're not going to count them. I just found that completely just very, very disturbing, along with the fact that the best job in that damn prison was to work for the governor for free. That was the best job. A person that was life without parole, he could get that job, and that would be the best job he could get. And all the prisoners ended up working for free in the prison. It's just, if you get a chance, you got to read this New Yorker article on Arkansas prison system. It was just very, very disturbing.
As long as you mentioned the New Yorker, by the way, there is another compelling article in this week's issue, and that is about the proliferation of discount stores in minority communities. They're talking about Family Dollar, Dollar Store, and how they actually attract crime and make neighborhoods less safe. You've got to read that article. But anyway, I wanted to talk about one other issue of discretion at the kind of the. I talked a bit about the front end. Let's talk about the back end. A little bit about sentencing. Now, when I was a prosecutor before they did the guidelines, and in the old days, you had a law that if you violated, you could be sentenced from, let's say hypothetically, anywhere from 0 to 20 years. And then in the Reagan administration, they passed these new sentencing guidelines. It was a determinative sentencing system, and it's talked about in the film, where, and they call it truth in sentencing, where you had these guidelines that had specific ranges of sentencing. So the judge had very little discretion. If you were a certain age and had a certain record and had a certain role in the offense, they'd actually calculate it through a matrix, and you were given a specific sentence within a range of, let's say, 32 to 36 months. I am curious, let's have the discussion here. Is that a better system than just letting the judge decide whether or not it's somewhere between 0 and 20 years? Because the film suggests, now if the ranges are themselves discriminatory, and that's what happened in the issue between crack and powdered cocaine, that's a problem. But do you think it's better to have the judge kind of confined to sentencing and specific ranges, or do you believe that the judge should have full discretion to decide whatever he or she wants to do?
Don, I'll take the first crack at that, Don. First of all, they have what they call 3553 factors in federal court, which allows the judge to deviate from the guidelines to give a person a lower sentence if he wants. But the issue of whether or not a judge's hands are bound, I've heard that a number of times. They say, well, my hands are sort of bound, the guidelines say it should be between here and here. And I think that if I look back over, I've been around for a long time, back in the olden days, I think that having the judges have discretion resulted in a fairer situation for the people that were going through the court system. That's just my own personal opinion. So
and that's opposed to the mandatory minimum sections you're thinking of, or they're.
Yeah, right now they got so many 10-year mandatory, 15-year mandatory, 20-year. So many.
How does the plea bargaining system work into that then? Does that?
Well, what happens? It's not very, very good, because what happens is, a person allegedly commits a crime, and if he pleads guilty, he usually has to plead into one of those categories that, between a 5-year or 10-year or 15 or 20-year sentence. And so then the attorney has to make arguments to try to get it lower than that. And there are some arguments, but the reality is that usually the judge is going to be somewhat close to the system unless there are some significant 3553 factors, that allow the judge to deviate from those guidelines. And so it's a tough situation for people going in front of a federal court.
But from what I understand, a lot of times that, defendants have to plead out because there's so many charges thrown at them, that, something is gonna stick, and they'd rather just plead, know how much time they're going to get, as opposed to, some sort of life sentence and then go to a jury trial with that.
Well, the point is made in the film, and it's very true. The system would collapse without plea bargaining.
Totally would.
It would just collapse. And that's even before COVID. I mean, where the courthouses are shut, but you can't. No one has the capacity to try every case. And the defendants themselves don't have necessarily an incentive to try it, because they don't want to have to. A lot of people don't want to have to pay lawyers, or don't want the delay that's inherent in waiting for trial.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because, the bail situation, it becomes a sort of this catch-22, is that if you can't afford the bail, you have to sit in jail waiting to get, for your trial. And so it becomes sometimes easier to just, that one of the cases in the movie was that kid who was in jail for almost 3 years. That's craziness, but it's what happens in the system. I want to ask one question that came up from somebody that somebody else mentioned, not tonight, but the other night, is that why didn't the innocent bystanders that were watching George Floyd be killed, why didn't they intervene? What would be the consequences if they tried to stop the police?
Fear.
No, obstruction of legal process would be the charge. If someone went in and tried to stop this police officer, they would get beat up and arrested. Obstruction of legal process. That's never going to happen in front of other cops. That's just never going to happen. The one cop that was standing around watching, he could have said, pulled the guy off, said, "Look, you're killing this guy." He could have done that. Any one of them could have gotten up from the position that they were in and said, "Hey, look, we got to stop this. We're killing this guy." But they didn't do that. And that's why that 8 minutes and I think 46 seconds, I don't remember.
Yeah, 46 seconds.
It's been revised down to 7 minutes and 46 seconds.
Okay.
That's why that's so important, because what the argument is, okay, well, maybe for 6 minutes or 5 minutes, you were, stopping him from resisting arrest. But what about that extra 3 minutes when you know that this guy can't breathe and is dying? What about those 3 minutes? You're assaulting him and he's dying, and he died.
Is there any organizations out there? Is there an organization that you guys know about that can sort of get involved in sort of changing this system? I know about the Innocent Project, but that really deals with people who've already been convicted, right? And then they're trying to get them out. But is there anything that helps them before they get into the Innocent Project or need the Innocent Project?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do as citizens is, when those votes come up for the county prosecutor, I think, the community can run a candidate that they think is going to be more sensitive to the issues of communities of color when it comes to prosecution and sentencing. Because those county prosecutors have an enormous amount of power to be able to affect change. Look at how long it took for the situation in Atlanta for the gentleman that was shot in the back at the Wendy's, for them to come down with charges for those officers, for the mayor to fire those officers. Whereas, some people argue that there have been less tear up in Minneapolis had, Mike Freeman decided to prosecute those 4 officers from the jump when they had the press conference at the FBI, as opposed to talking about a thorough investigation and things of that nature where people have had it. They don't want to They don't want to hear it. So that's, so that's one thing, is through voting on that county prosecutor. And I think also too, who is selected as the police chief can have a lot to do with the culture of policing. But I think what we're beginning to see is that there are so many different systems that are responsible and involved in our own oppression, that we have to address them, one by one, whether it's the criteria for policing, whether it's the post board, whether it's the arbitration process for officers, contracts for unions for officers, where it is, implicit bias training and, changing the culture of organizations. And I think that one of the things that this George Floyd murder has done is it's kind of pulled the veil off of the Minnesota nice, and it's really revealed the Minnesota ice. And I think that we're now going to have to dig deeper into the systemic issues that are running behind some of these organizations that are propping up the amount of racism and disparity that's taken place right here in Hennepin County.
I mean, when I think it's a national thing. The one thing that also came out in the film is the fact that, I mean, every president except for maybe Carter, it seems like he came out of the whole thing, has been involved in setting up the system of criminology towards Black men, and which increased the prison penalties and increased the law enforcement. I didn't, and totally forgot that Clinton was involved in the militarization of the police department. I think, he, even though he apologized for it, he has a lot to pay for that. I think Clinton
did the most. I think Clinton did the most damage of all the presidents.
I think he did too, and I didn't realize that until I saw the movie the first time, and then you realize, and then Trump has obviously turned this into literally a civil war, analogy. He has turned this into, and people think that if he's the law and order president, they don't understand there will not be any law and order as long as Trump is president. I mean, he is the epitome of the issues that we're going to end up facing into the future. I mean, the police department has to be changed. It has to be changed. And it doesn't mean that you eliminate the police, because that's not going to happen, but you're going to have to eliminate the structure of the police department as it exists right now.
I think that the police chief in Minneapolis right now, if given the opportunity, was on the right track to do something with the police department. And I think that, from my perspective, not being able to define what defunding the police department has created a culture out in our community that's very scary. And a lot of people are out there doing bad things, and they're saying the police aren't coming out there in time. And, they've got to be very focused on what it is. If you're saying defund the police department, what does that mean? How is it going to affect public safety? Because it's really important that people feel secure in their own homes. My home was burglarized twice. And the first thing I did was call the police. And when they were out there in less than 5 minutes, I was a very happy camper, because my wife and my daughter were up hiding in a closet. Mm-hmm. So you're never going to get me to say that I don't want the police around, because I do want them around. Okay. But I don't want them knocking our heads in. And every time I get stopped, which is very infrequently, I'm afraid also, because I don't know what's going to happen. You got to follow the golden rule so that you don't end up in a bad situation. So
I think one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, that pervades our society is that somehow Black people are not in favor of law and order. I mean, that we frankly tend to be more conservative on issues of public safety. And, I think this was kind of illustrated with a lot of the unrest in the streets a month ago, where, it wasn't us. It wasn't people looking like us that burned down the 3rd precinct.
No, it wasn't.
It was not. Now maybe some of us went in and got ourselves a TV at Target or something that we should.
Or some liquor.
But some cigarettes or something. But but most of the real serious damage was not done by us, by our community, because our mothers taught us better. And I, so we're the ones who were impacted most by criminal behavior. So,
Well, I think
law and order community.
we need to admit that we live in a lawless society, and we do need law enforcement. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I live in North Minneapolis, and we've had several community meetings where we have met with the Minneapolis Police Department, our city council, our state representative. Not one of my neighbors is talking about defunding the police. It's about removing the police officers that hurt and harm us and being able to support good law enforcement, but not scrapping it and then having some sort of amorphic agency, public, something that is not going to be there when we need them. Now, if it's a matter of having certain resources go for psychiatric calls like they do in LA County with their psychiatric teams, they go out, okay, or domestic violence, all right. But this, like Mr. Tyler said, they need to be very definitive about what they're talking about when they're talking about, defunding the police. I think it should be more about, the transformation of, the Minneapolis Police Department.
Ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen. But the word defunding, I think, really
very pejorative, scary. No.
Is there a way that, I mean, one of the things also that came out of the film is the difference in sentencing. Is there a way to make sentencing between whites and blacks with similar crimes more of a public report so people know? I think sometimes people don't know what's going on. I mean, we're on this call right now or on the Zoom right now because some people don't know what it is like to be black in America. They have no idea. And our job is to let them know what it is like to be black in America, to grow up black in America, what we have to pass on to our kids, what our parents passed on to us. And hopefully we won't have to pass it on to our grandkids, but I can't guarantee that. So is there something that can actually be more identified to a larger audience about the laws, about what's happening, what people get sentenced? I don't think that some people even understand how bail works. I really don't. I mean, we grow up with this stuff. See, this is my point, is that we grow up with this stuff from the time we can actually hear and understand words. We know how to deal with the police. We know what bail is. We know what jail is. We know what we know our stuff's kind of instinctual. It's like we're going to go through this jungle training as kids. And some people have no idea what that's like. They have no idea what we're talking about. So is there a way to do that? What do you guys think?
Well, I can only speak about kind of federal sentencing, and I know there's a lot of data out there. I mean, the federal sentencing system has been scrutinized for the last 30 years, and I know that there are institutions that have studied disparities in sentencing, and in fact, the guidelines themselves were designed to eliminate those disparities. So I'm sure there's tons of data, at least on the federal system. I'm not quite sure about the state system. Clayton, whether or not there's similar data on the state system that either crime or justice looked at, but I'm sure it's out there in various forms if you want to look at it.
I would think maybe one of the bigger issues, not so much about sentencing, but about policing itself.
Yeah.
Where you police, who you police. If you take a look at the ACLU study, Picking Up the Pieces, which I think was done in 2012, City of Minneapolis, 4th Precinct, which is North Minneapolis, is highly over-policed in relation to the rest of the city of Minneapolis, so the southern part of it. And it's not to say that there aren't crimes taking place in the north, but there are crimes also taking place in the south. Right. But if you're putting all of your resources, right, and you are policing the people that have the least amount of resources to be able to survive and take care of themselves, then you're going to have a disproportionate number of those people being impacted by the, by the system. And I think that's probably one of the bigger, bigger crimes, in that regard, as far as how many of us are being brought and kept into the system, as opposed to, other areas of the city or the county.
I think Don mentioned this earlier, but there's a lot of discretion in what the police do when they're out there. I mean, so if I don't turn on my turn signal, he doesn't have to stop me, but that's what they do. They stop you. And then if they smell marijuana in your car, all of a sudden they're going to search your whole car. And the next thing you know, you're going to jail. You know what I'm saying? So that's what happens. And so, the police have this total discretion. I mean, traveling with a tail light out or something hanging from your visor. Those are reasons people get stopped all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's a discretionary thing. And
right. And I think in a situation where the officer, let's say, stops a white person and gives that person just a verbal warning, I don't think that's necessarily recorded in the system. So even the data you have, mm-hmm. It may not be complete. But I think and I may be incorrect on that, but I know there's data out there. I'm pretty sure that the crime, the Council on Crime and Justice looked at that issue. Maybe its successor organization did. And, keep in mind that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights has initiated an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. So I'm sure they're going to be collecting that data. And, if you want to see what's done in other cities, remember that the Department of Justice did very comprehensive investigations of the police departments in Chicago and Baltimore and Seattle and a couple other cities. And if you look in that report, that documents very clearly the disparity in law enforcement contacts. And I know that there's similar statistics here in the Twin Cities that have been collected by some organization. I just don't know off the top of my head which one.
Who determines what neighborhoods get policed the most? How does that, to your point, Ken, who decides that?
Well, some police departments use a lot of data analytics or predictive analytics in regards to, where they're going to need to have more, units based upon calls for service, based upon, crime statistics and things of that nature. And so, they'll send them to where they need to be. In the case of, Minneapolis right now, with a number of shootings that have taken place over the last 30 days, I mean, it's definitely exhausting a lot of the time, effort, and resources of the police just to, deal with those shootings. And then that means that there's less resources for them to be able to investigate other crimes that are just as important, whether it may be child abuse or, white collar crimes or, vandalism and, things of that nature. So, and just to, add a point, I used to sit on the police conduct review panel for the Minneapolis Police Department. And with each of the cases that I reviewed, I think that Mr. Tyler and Mr. Lewis, what they said is very, very true. I mean, officers have an enormous amount of discretion in regards to what levers of the law that they will elect to use when working with the citizenship. But in the case of like Minneapolis, where 94% of your police officers live outside of, the city itself, and they're literally coming out of the suburbs into the city to police and then go out, I think that that's a problem. I think that when you have certain restrictions or guidelines on who actually becomes a police officer or who is eligible to become a police officer due to backgrounds and, their past history, that becomes, another issue that can help to bring some more balance and equanimity in regards to cultural competency and, the concept of protecting and serving. I mean, the motto of the Minneapolis Police Department is to protect with courage and to serve with humanity. I think it is, and and really fulfilling that mission requires, you know, the right kind of people and the right kind of mindset that are really truly coming in to help and not to, you know, not to harm.
I'm going to talk out to my wife real quick because she required residency for police officers when she was on the city council.
Rightfully so.
Yeah,
That should be,
that should be a requirement. To your point about latitude, do prosecutors have latitude in how they conduct their cases?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They can charge a case or not charge it. The county attorney has total discretion too. He can tell the group attorney to lower the charges or not prosecute one aspect or go harder on another aspect.
So like, if they have a
quick example, John Choi over in St. Paul, you know, there's an immigration law that says that if you get a stay of adjudication, which means that after a year the case goes away, you know, you wouldn't have immigration consequences. I shouldn't say wouldn't have. He abolished that law, saying that I'm not going to force this guy to admit on the record his offense and therefore have immigration consequences. That's what a prosecutor can do. Mm-hmm. And as a result, people who were got the benefit of a deal didn't have to lose their immigration status. So prosecutors can do a lot. Choi and Pete Orbit have done a lot of things like that.
So we have a few more minutes here, and I want to talk about some. I don't know if this is positive, but what can you guys do as attorneys, and you also, Ken, as being on sort of the advisory boards for the police department, but also how can we change the situation that we caught ourselves into? We're caught up in a legal system that is continuing to use Black people as an economic force in America, which is ultimately not slavery, but just by another name. Mm-hmm. Well, Don's smiling. Don said I have no idea.
You know, this is the whole issue of race is a big elephant. Mm-hmm. And you can only kind of attack it a bite at a time sometimes. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we're just talking about the criminal justice system. No one has said anything about education or healthcare or housing. All of these things which impact, you know, who enters the criminal justice system to begin with. So this battle has to be fought on a number of fronts. And I think we as lawyers have to pick at least one or two bites of this elephant that we're going to eat. I mean, I think, you know, certain aspects of reform, there's, you know, been a very emphasis recently on bail reform, for example. And there are a lot of people who are attacking that. A lot of folks are focusing on restructuring the training of police departments. So I think you just got to attack it at various angles. Do the best you can.
One more thing. There's a program that Summit Academy has, and Summit says the best social service you can do is to give a person a job. And they take these prisoners that come out, these guys that come out of prison, they give them an education, they train them, and then they get them a job. The Network for Better Futures does the same thing. That's the type of thing that we have to do in our society is, you know, when people come out of jail, we got to get them whole so that they can get a house, so that they can get back into society. And those two programs do that. And so I'm very proud to be associated with those programs.
What are those two programs again? The
Network for Better Futures and Summit Academy. You should absolutely go look at those. They're just outstanding organizations.
Ujala Place does good work as well. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question earlier, Craig, what can we do? One, we can know the law and know our rights. Two, we can vote. Three, we can get on boards and commissions to be able to try to influence policy. We can become more civically engaged whether it's your neighborhood association, whether it's your church or any of these nonprofits, that are out there that are trying to, move the needle in regards to, racial equity. It can even come down to having those crucial conversations and talking about race to people outside of your own race, and by financially contributing to organizations that are trying to promote racial equity for all of us. So there are some things that we can do, and to know people like Clayton and Don, so should we get in a jam, we know who to call. So I know I've got Clayton for my city and county issues, and God forbid I ever get a federal charge. Don, I know you're out there. So
Clayton does federal work too, so
yeah, so knowing guys like you,
though, of things that we can do, and I just think that we have to keep on pushing and keep on trucking, because there are a lot of things that we have to do. So
I appreciate this. So unfortunately, we run out of time. I'm going to apologize for not being able to get through all the Q&As, the questions we had up there, but we keep the questions. We also will reserve this communication, mspfilm.org on our website. So people that want to tap into it later on. I want to thank Ken, Clayton, and Don for being part of this conversation. It's great. I mean, we could do this over and over. This may have been just part one of it, because I had a series of questions I wanted to talk about, but we can only do so much in a limited amount of time. To your elephant, statement, I think we got a leg, so right. I want to thank Penny and Bill George Foundation. I want to thank Kelly and Mike Palmer and Knock for helping us. I want to thank our members. I want to thank everybody for watching this. Join We the People. Again, we come back on July 20th. We're doing a film called Stone Island. Please join us. For more information, go to Minneapolis Film Society. It's mspfilm.org as our website, and Film Society is who we are. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Did a great job, and take care. Okay.
Pretty much.
yeah.